Many countries around the world have high-speed rail. Japan's Shinkansen bullet train started this in the 1960s. Countries in the EU started rolling out their own versions starting in the 1980s, and China's high-speed rail started to come to fruition in the late 90s. I got to experience this high-speed travel for the first time when I took a high-speed trip from Amsterdam to Paris. It made me wish the US could have something like that. The US for its part is very far behind. How far behind? Well, currently in the entire US there is only one place with a high-speed train. That would be the Acela in the Northeast Corridor. Unfortunately, that train can only reach speeds of about 160 miles for a stretch of about 30 miles. The rest of the time, it averages roughly 78 miles an hour. While not crazy fast, it is an improvement over driving. So why the lack of high-speed trains in the US? I'll cover that another time. Having high speed would help the US economically and environmentally, and you don't even need to blanket the country with trains. Here are 3 areas that would benefit the most. Number 1, the Northeast Corridor itself. From Washington, D.C. all the way to Boston is a stretch of 450 miles. It would take about 7 hours to travel on a regular Amtrak train now. The entire megalopolis has a population of 52 million as of 2010 and accounts for 20% of the entire US's GDP. Imagine living in Philadelphia and working in DC, or living in Boston wanting to visit friends in New York City in less than 90 minutes. Between all the leisure and business travelers, connecting the whole thing together would be an economic slam dunk. Now, Amtrak does have a plan to construct next generation high-speed line with an estimated $117 billion price tag. However, those plans might not be fully realized until 2040. So some waiting is required. Number 2, the Texas Triangle. The Texas Triangle's metro together account for more than 66% of the population of Texas and 77% of the GDP of the state and 6.9% of the entire US GDP. So connecting those areas for commerce would make sense. Right now, despite years of setbacks, a high-speed line is currently being built between Dallas and Houston with one stop in between, with most of the funding coming from the Central Japanese Railway Company. It will be a system modeled after the Japanese Shinkansen bullet trains to transport people between the two cities in 90 minutes. This would open the door for more interstate travelers and maybe spur development between other big cities, like Austin and San Antonio. Number 3, California. California would have the 5th largest economy in the world if it were its own country. It alone is 14.8% of the US's GDP, so having it connect the 2 largest areas of the state is a no-brainer. As of this video, the California High-Speed Rail Authority is in the process of building a line that would go from the Bay Area to Los Angeles, going through the Central Valley with a top speed of 220 miles per hour. Phase 2 of the plan would include extensions up to Sacramento and down to San Diego. Unfortunately, the initial service date keeps getting pushed back due to delays, but when this is eventually complete, it could fundamentally change how Californians get around the state. And as a bonus, another route that would be ideal is Los Angeles to Las Vegas. A company called Brightline West is spearheading the effort and already has experience in Florida. The route would take about 3 hours with a top speed of 180 miles per hour, with a planned launch in 2026 and potential groundbreaking later this year. Now there are other examples and I hope to cover them in other videos, but all these projects have a chance to help the US break some of its car dependence and lower emissions in the process. Some may balk at them because of the cost, but I'll leave you with this. In the early 1960s, the Japanese Shinkansen bullet train had an original budget of 200 billion yen, however that ballooned to 400 billion. To save face from the political pressure, both the lead engineer and the president of Japanese National Railways ended up resigning. However, the initial controversy over the cost disappeared when the train started regular service, and those 2 men were ultimately vindicated by history. Today, nobody is bothered about the cost of the trains because it became so beloved and useful, and I think eventually the same thing can happen here in the US. But what do you guys think? Go ahead and let me know in the comments.